The sun hung low over the jagged horizon, casting long golden fingers across the desert plains. Dust swirled lazily in the wind, glinting like tiny specks of gold, carried over the barren stretches of sand and rock. It was the kind of place where life seemed fragile, and the days stretched long and quiet. Here, far from any town or settlement, lived a solitary Apache named Tay. His presence in the desert was like a shadow among shadows, quiet, watchful, and unassuming. To the rare traveler who might stumble across him, he would appear almost as part of the land itself, a figure who moved seamlessly with the rocks, the shrubs, and the whispering winds. Tay's days were measured by the rhythms of nature. Each morning he rose before the sun, allowing its first feeble light to warm the cold stones that made up his modest shelter. His dwelling was simple, a lean to fashioned from fallen branches, animal hides, and mud, but it was sufficient. Within its walls he kept only what was necessary: a few tools, a bed of woven grasses, and the weapons he had inherited from his father. To an outsider it might seem austere, but to Tay it was enough. He did not crave the chatter of a village or the commerce of a town. He preferred the silence, the solitude, and the lessons that the desert could teach. The land itself was a character in his life, a harsh, beautiful companion that demanded respect. Tay knew the signs of approaching storms before the first cloud appeared. He could read the tracks of animals, determine which water sources were reliable, and navigate the labyrinth of canyons and mesas as easily as he breathed. And yet, despite all his skill and knowledge, he was not invincible. The desert had its ways of testing those who dared to live within it, reminding him that survival required vigilance, patience, and humility. This day, like many before it, began with the usual ritual. Tay stepped out of his lean-to, squinting at the horizon where the sky burned orange and pink. He ran his hand over the rough bark of a nearby mesquite tree, drawing a silent comfort from its familiar texture. Birds, small, sharp-eyed creatures, called from the cliffs, darting in arcs that made patterns against the sky. A lizard scuttled across the sun-baked ground, disappearing into a crack before Tay's eyes could fully register it. Every motion, every sound, every smell in this wide-open world was a piece of the tapestry he had grown to know intimately. Though he was accustomed to the solitude, there was a subtle ache that lingered in Tay's chest, a quiet reminder of the human connections he had once known. He thought of his family, of friends long gone or scattered across the plains, of stories and laughter left behind. Yet he had chosen this path intentionally, leaving the clamor and chaos of settlements for the serenity and raw challenge of the land. Life here demanded more than skill. It demanded resilience, a certain mental fortitude that many could not endure. As he prepared his morning meal, a small portion of dried meat and roots, Tay's senses remained alert. The wind carried more than just the scent of sagebrush and dust. It carried whispers of movement, subtle shifts in the sand that spoke of distant animals, or perhaps travelers crossing far-off ridges. The desert was never truly silent, and one learned to listen not just with the ears, but with every fiber of the body. It was this attentiveness that had kept Tay alive through years of isolation. And yet, as the day stretched ahead, there was an unusual tension in the air. The wind seemed to hesitate, carrying no sound, no familiar scent, only a strange, pressing quiet. Tay paused mid-step, instinctively scanning the horizon. Something felt different. The desert, for all its predictability, had a way of warning those who paid attention. Something was coming, or something had arrived. He could not know what, yet he trusted the instinct that had been honed over countless days under the relentless sun. Tay adjusted the strap of his bow across his shoulder, a simple habit, a preparation for the unknown. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to meet it, guided by the skills, the patience, and the solitary wisdom that the desert had taught him. Little did he know, The calm and isolation of this morning would soon be shattered by a desperate, echoing plea that would pierce the quiet, marking the beginning of an encounter that would challenge everything he thought he knew about danger, compassion, and the fragile boundary between life and death. The morning air, which had seemed so serene just moments before, was suddenly pierced by a sound that made Tay freeze mid-step. It was faint at first, almost drowned by the whispering wind, but it carried a sharp, urgent quality, a human voice calling out in desperation. "Help, please." Tay's ears pricked. He scanned the horizon with practiced vigilance, eyes narrowing at the ridges and mesas that cut jagged lines against the sky. The plains were vast and deceptive, with hidden gullies and shadowed crevices where a person or a threat could easily hide. The voice came again, clearer this time, urgent and panicked. "Please, somebody. Help me. I can't breathe." Tay's pulse quickened, not out of fear, but instinct. In all his years of solitude, he had never encountered a cry like this, raw, immediate, suffused with helplessness. He moved cautiously toward the sound, careful to leave no trace of his approach. Every step was measured, silent on the sun-hardened earth. As his eyes darted to the natural contours of the land, seeking any hint of danger. After several tense minutes, he came upon a small clearing, partially concealed by a tangle of scrub and mesquite. There, lying on the ground, was a heavy sack, roughly sewn and battered from exposure. The voice came from within it, muffled but insistent. It wasn't humanly possible that a creature of ordinary size could be causing this sound. And yet, the pleading, gasping cries were unmistakably human. Tay crouched behind a rock, his mind working quickly. Traps and ambush were not uncommon in these parts, and the desert had a way of concealing both danger and opportunity. Whoever or whatever was inside that sack could be a victim in need of aid, or it could be a lure meant to ensnare the unwary. He studied the surrounding area. No footprints leading away from the sack, no signs of struggle nearby. The only movement was the subtle shifting of the sack itself, as if whatever was inside were attempting to breathe, to wriggle free, to make itself heard. A second, more frantic cry pierced the air. "Please, open it. I can't. Breathe." The desperation in her voice struck Tay deeply. His hand instinctively moved to the bow slung across his shoulder, but he did not draw it. He had faced wild animals, rival hunters, and storms that could crush a man under their force, but this was different. This was life calling out for life, and the Apache's instincts did not allow him to ignore it. Still, caution tempered his compassion. He circled the clearing slowly, observing every detail, the way the sun glinted off the sack's fibers, the faint scratches on the surrounding dirt, the way the wind carried her muffled sobs. He noted the absence of anyone else nearby, which was both reassuring and perplexing. Who had left her here, and why? Finally, he crouched close enough to see a hint of movement inside the sack, a trembling figure, struggling, gasping for air. Tay's heart beat faster, but his mind stayed calm. He had survived countless dangers in the wilderness precisely because he approached each situation with measured care. Now he had to decide, intervene immediately and risk unknown consequences, or wait and observe, potentially letting her suffer or worse. The wind shifted, carrying a faint scent human, female, terrified. That small, undeniable detail broke the last thread of hesitation. He could not leave her here. Whatever trap or risk lay ahead, he had to act. Slowly, deliberately, he reached toward the sack, his fingers brushing the rough cloth. He paused, took a steadying breath, and prepared himself for whatever he might find inside in that moment. The desert seemed to hold its breath with him. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence almost oppressive, as though the land itself waited for the next move. The cries grew weaker, more urgent, compelling him forward. Tay knew that once he lifted the sack, there would be no turning back. With steady hands and unwavering resolve, the Apache began to lift the heavy, trembling bundle, unaware that what he was about to discover would make time itself seem to pause. As Tay lifted the sack, the desert seemed to fade into a muted haze, the wind slowing as if time itself had decided to pause. The muffled cries grew louder, raw, and urgent, and he could feel the frantic pulse of life beneath the rough, worn cloth. Carefully, he braced the sack against his knees, his hands steady despite the tension coiling in his chest. The first thing he noticed was the warmth. Whoever or whatever was inside was undeniably human, radiating heat against his palms. The sounds of shallow, desperate gasps confirmed it. "I can't breathe," she whispered again, a voice hoarse and strained, shaking him to the core. Tay worked quickly but gently to undo the knots. The woman inside was light, almost fragile, and she wriggled in panic as the sack loosened. When the last knot gave way, he hesitated for only a heartbeat before carefully rolling the sack open. The sight that met him was harrowing. A young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, lay curled inside, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her clothes were torn and dusty, smeared with dirt, and her hair clung to her face in matted strands. Her eyes, wide with terror, met his, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other, strangers caught in a suspended instant of fear and confusion. She tried to sit up but coughed violently, gasping for air. Tay immediately steadied her, his hands firm yet gentle on her shoulders. "Breathe," he said softly, his voice calm, grounded in the unshakable steadiness of someone who had faced the harshness of the desert for years. "You're safe now. I've got you." Her relief was palpable but fragile. Tears streaked the grime on her cheeks as she whispered brokenly, Thank you. I didn't think anyone would find me." Her voice trailed off, heavy with exhaustion and fear. Tay kept his eyes on her, assessing her condition. There were no visible wounds, no blood, no cuts, but she was clearly dehydrated and terrified. Her trembling wasn't just from the cold or fatigue. It was the residual terror of captivity. He noticed bruises forming along her arms and shoulders, faint but telling. Someone had held her against her will. "Who did this to you?" Tay asked gently, scanning the area around them for signs of the perpetrator. The desert lay empty, silent, and indifferent. "Who left you here?" The woman shook her head, shivering. I don't know. They put me in a sack, left me. I tried to call out, but no one came." Her voice faltered, trembling with the memory of suffocating in the confined space. Tay's instincts sharpened. She had been abandoned intentionally, left to die or disappear. And yet, in this desolate landscape, fate had intervened. Her voice, desperate and raw, had carried across the plains to him. He had been alone, just as always, and now he was tasked with saving someone else. He offered her water from his canteen, watching as her hands trembled as she took it, gulping down the liquid with a mix of relief and disbelief. Each sip brought color back to her cheeks, a small measure of life returning after the suffocating ordeal. "Rest," Tay instructed gently, guiding her to lie back on a bed of soft grasses he had prepared earlier. "You've been through a lot. The desert can wait while you recover." The woman's gaze lingered on him, full of gratitude, fear, and unspoken questions. She was safe for now, but Tay could sense that the story behind her capture was far from over. The desert, vast and merciless, had allowed this moment of rescue, but he knew danger often lingered just beyond sight, hidden in shadowed canyons or under the unyielding sundot. As she drifted into a trembling, uneasy rest, Tay scanned the horizon. His mind was alert, calculating, and wary. Whoever had put her in the sack might still be nearby. The desert offered sanctuary, yes, But it was also a place where threats could strike suddenly, leaving no warning. Tay's resolve hardened. She had been found, yes, but survival in this unforgiving land required more than just discovery. It required vigilance, strategy, and courage. And Tay was nothing if not attuned to the harsh lessons of the wilderness. Encounter had begun as a desperate plea echoing across the desert, but now, as he sat beside the woman, Tay understood that this was only the first step in a journey neither of them could yet foresee. Taye watched the woman carefully as she rested, her shallow breath slowly finding a steadier rhythm. The desert was quiet again, but the tranquility felt uneasy, almost deceptive. Years of living in isolation had taught him that appearances were often misleading. In this vast open land, danger could take many forms, some hidden in plain sight, others lurking beyond the horizon. And the suddenness of her appearance, tied up in a sack and left to suffocate, raised more questions than answers. He found himself caught between two instincts that pulled in opposite directions. On one hand, the Apache's sense of honor and compassion compelled him to protect the woman, to ensure her safety until she regained strength. He had spent a lifetime respecting life, knowing that even the smallest actions could carry immense weight in the fragile balance of survival. Turning away was unthinkable, yet the other instinct, pragmatic, cautious, and honed by years alone in the wilderness, warned him to remain vigilant. Who had done this? Was the woman truly innocent or part of a larger trap? The desert had a way of teaching harsh lessons. Strangers often brought trouble, and even the desperate cries of the weak could conceal hidden danger. Tay's hand drifted instinctively to his bow, fingers brushing the smooth wood as his eyes scanned the horizon, the ridges, and the small gullies that could conceal an ambush. He crouched nearby, pretending to arrange small rocks and twigs to avoid revealing his tense posture, all while his mind worked through worst-case scenarios. Perhaps someone had left her to die as punishment or as a distraction. Perhaps a rival band of hunters, thieves, or worse lurked nearby, waiting for him to make a move. He knew that one careless decision could spell disaster, not just for him, but for the woman as well. Her faint stirring pulled him back to the immediate reality. She shifted slightly, eyes fluttering open, filled with fear yet trusting, relying on him entirely. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice hoarse and trembling. Tay gave a careful, measured response, choosing words that would calm without giving away unnecessary information. "You're safe," he said, keeping his tone neutral but firm. "The desert is quiet here. No one can reach you easily. You can rest." Her gaze darted to the ridges and then back to him, lingering with questions she didn't voice. She clearly understood the danger she had been in, and even now, though physically rescued, her mind raced through uncertainty and fear. Tay realized that while her body had been freed, her mind was still captive, trapped in the memory of suffocation and the terror of abandonment. The conflict inside Tay deepened. Should he allow her to remain here while he scouted the surrounding area for threats, risking that she might wander or make noise? Or should he move her, exposing both of them to potential dangers as he carried her across the harsh terrain? Both choices carried risk. In this environment, mistakes were often fatal. His eyes returned to the horizon, noting the shifting shadows, the subtle movements of distant rocks and shrubs. Something in the stillness of the morning felt off, too calm, too expectant. The desert had always demanded respect for its hidden threats, and Tay trusted its lessons. Every instinct screamed caution, yet the sound of her labored breaths reminded him that inaction could also be deadly. Ultimately, his decision was guided by a simple principle. Life demanded action, tempered by vigilance. He would protect her, but he would do so carefully, never letting fear override reason. He observed her for another few tense minutes, noting her weak attempts to shift, the trembling in her hands, and the desperation lingering in her eyes. She was utterly reliant on him. With that realization, the line between instinct and morality became clear. The Apache would help her survive, but every movement, every choice would be deliberate, precise, and cautious. There could be no recklessness here, not in this barren land where a single misstep could mean death. Tay adjusted the strap of his bow across his shoulder once more, silently preparing for the journey ahead. The desert was indifferent to suffering, but he was not. He would navigate this unknown together with the woman, guided by skill, patience, and an unwavering sense of responsibility. Yet beneath that determination lingered a gnawing unease. The desert had already sent a warning, and he knew that the worst was not yet revealed. The stage was set, the tension coiled tight. And somewhere, in the shadows of the ridges beyond, the secrets behind the sack and the woman's desperate plea waited to be unveiled. Tay remained crouched beside the woman, the weight of the desert pressing silently against him. Every instinct he possessed urged him to remain cautious, to scan the horizon repeatedly to ensure no threat lurked in the shadows. Yet at the same time, every moral fiber within him demanded action. She was suffocating, trapped, vulnerable, and if he hesitated any longer, it might be too late. He studied the sack again, noting the rough weave of its fabric, the way it bulged slightly as she struggled. The ropes that bound it were coarse but tight, knotted with deliberate strength. Whoever had placed her here had meant to restrain her completely, and now it fell to him to undo that cruel work. The desert stillness was deafening as he weighed his choices. He could wait and observe further, searching for any hidden danger nearby, but time was a luxury she did not have. Each shallow breath she took reminded him that the seconds ticking by were critical. Her life hung in the balance, and his indecision could be deadly. Tay's hands rested on the rough fibers, his fingers tracing the knots with careful deliberation. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. The wilderness had taught him patience and precision, and those lessons applied as much to human life as to hunting or tracking. One wrong movement could harm her or alert a hidden enemy, but a measured, deliberate approach could save her. "Stay calm," he murmured softly, not just to her, but to himself. One step at a time. He began with the first knot, loosening it slowly. The woman's muffled gasps grew louder, urgent, pleading. Each tug of the rope revealed more of her fragile form. He worked steadily, knot by knot, aware that any sudden motion might startle her, or worse, strain the fabric and cause injury. As the final knot loosened, Tay hesitated for the briefest moment. His eyes swept the surrounding plains once more, scanning for movement, for shadows, for anything that might signal danger. The desert was deceptively silent, a place where threats often arrived unannounced. But no signs appeared. The risk was there. Of course, he could not dismiss that, but he knew in his heart that the moment had come. He took a deep breath, letting the cool desert air fill his lungs. Then, with deliberate care, he grasped the edges of the sack and began to lift it. Time seemed to slow as he did so. The weight of the bundle was light, almost fragile, and the muffled sounds within grew more frantic. His muscles tensed, ready to respond to any sudden movement, any unexpected threat. But even as caution guided him, he felt a rising sense of anticipation, not fear, but a strange, charged awareness that something remarkable was about to be revealed. The desert held its breath with him. The wind stilled, as if acknowledging the significance of this moment. Even the birds on the cliffs above seemed to pause mid-flight, their calls absent. Tay's eyes never left the sack, his mind alert, every nerve prepared for action. And then, with a final, careful lift, the sack revealed its secret. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the world seemed to tilt, and Tay froze, every muscle locked in shock. Whatever he had expected, it was nothing compared to what he now saw. His pulse thundered in his ears as the desert's calm seemed to shatter, replaced by a sudden dizzying clarity. The bundle he had lifted was not just a trapped, terrified woman. It was something far stranger, far more startling, something that made time itself seem to pause. Tay's mind raced to comprehend the sight, but comprehension lagged behind instinct. He froze, rooted to the spot, eyes wide, heart hammering, not in fear, but in disbelief. The desert, vast and unforgiving, had delivered a mystery unlike anything he had ever encountered, and in that suspended instant, everything he had known about solitude, survival, and human desperation was thrown into question. The moment stretched like a taut wire as Tay's eyes remained locked on the contents of the sack. His heart pounded not from exertion but from the shock of seeing something entirely unexpected. The muffled cries he had heard were not fully human, yet unmistakably alive. His mind struggled to reconcile what he knew with what he was seeing. Inside the sack lay a young woman, but not entirely as she appeared at first glance. Her limbs were strangely thin, almost fragile, and her skin had a pallor that suggested more than exhaustion or fear. Her eyes, wide and luminous, reflected an unnatural light, catching the sun's rays in a way that made them glow faintly against the desert backdrop. Her gasping breaths carried an almost musical resonance, a high-pitched echo that seemed to vibrate in the air itself. Tay froze, every instinct screaming caution. This was no ordinary human. And yet she was undeniably alive and undeniably desperate for help. The realization twisted a knot in his chest, fear mixed with the unshakable drive to act. She needed him, regardless of what she had become. Slowly she attempted to lift her head, and her gaze met his fully. It was not the frightened stare of a victim alone in the wilderness. It carried a sharp intelligence, almost otherworldly, that made Tay's skin prickle. Her lips moved, forming words that were hoarse but urgent. "Please. I can't stay." "Like this?" Tay's hands trembled slightly as he instinctively adjusted the sack to support her, careful not to disturb her fragile form. He realized that the danger she had been in before the ropes, the confinement, was nothing compared to the precarious state she was in now. Whatever had trapped her, whatever had altered her, required immediate attention. He scanned her body quickly, looking for injuries, signs of illness, or anything he could understand. There were no obvious wounds, no visible cause for the distress, but the way her chest rose and fell in uneven, shallow gasps told him that she was on the brink. She needed air, warmth, and care. The desert was unforgiving, and if he did not act quickly, this moment could be her last. Tay's mind raced, thinking of options, strategies, ways to help her without causing harm. He realized that traditional methods, the slow pacing of survival, the careful measures of wilderness life, would not suffice here. He needed to act decisively, blending caution with empathy, skill with instinct. As he gently helped her sit up, the sunlight revealed more peculiar details. Tiny flecks of shimmering dust clung to her hair and shoulders, reflecting the sun in dazzling patterns. Her breathing, though shallow, began to steady as he adjusted her position. The realization hit him. She was extraordinary, a being that the desert had hidden, perhaps for survival, perhaps for protection. And now fate had placed her in his hands. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the silence thick with unspoken questions and awe. The woman's eyes glimmered with gratitude, fear, and an almost imperceptible spark of recognition, as if she understood that her survival depended entirely on this solitary Apache. The desert around them remained eerily still. Birds circled silently above, and the wind that had once whispered through the scrub seemed to hold its breath. Tay felt a strange mixture of exhilaration and dread, the knowledge that he had discovered something far beyond the ordinary, yet the certainty that danger, whether natural or unnatural, was still present. He knew one thing with absolute clarity. The moment of lifting the sack had changed everything. Nothing would ever be the same, not the woman, not the desert, and not the solitary life he had built so carefully over the years. And in that suspended silence, Tay realized the truth. Some mysteries were meant to be confronted, and some lives were entrusted to him for reasons that the desert itself might never reveal. Tay sat frozen for a moment, the desert stretching endlessly around him, feeling the weight of the revelation pressing down like the midday sun. The woman before him was unlike anyone he had ever encountered, fragile yet powerful, human yet undeniably touched by something extraordinary. Her desperate eyes searched his, silently pleading for trust, for help, for protection. The immediate consequence of lifting the sack was clear. He could not return to his solitary routine. The quiet life he had cultivated over the years, measured by the rhythms of the wind, the sun, and the land, was gone. In its place was responsibility, sudden and urgent, for a life he had just discovered was in peril. He helped her to a slightly more secure position, adjusting the rough grasses beneath her. Her breaths, though still shallow, began to stabilize with his steady presence. Yet every instinct in Tay's body remained alert, scanning the surrounding plains, the hidden gullies, the ridges beyond, for any hint of the person or thing that had left her in the sack. The desert's silence was deceptive. It often masked danger until it struck with brutal swiftness. "Who did this to you?" he asked gently, careful not to startle her. The desert demanded both patience and respect, and Tay's voice carried that calm authority. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice still weak, trembling with fear. "I was taken. I tried to call, but no one came. I don't remember everything." Her words, fragmented and hesitant, only heightened his unease. Someone had gone to great lengths to trap her, leaving her vulnerable in a harsh environment. Whoever it was, they were still out there or had left a trail of danger behind them. Tay's mind worked rapidly, piecing together possibilities while simultaneously attending to her fragile state. He offered water again, this time ensuring she sipped slowly. The momentary relief on her face was unmistakable, yet fleeting. The terror had left a residue that would not vanish so easily. Tay knew that rescuing her physically was only the beginning. The desert's lessons extended beyond survival. They demanded understanding, caution, and foresight. As he sat beside her, a plan began to form in his mind. First, she needed shelter, protection from the sun, and rest. Then, he would need to assess the surrounding area for clues to determine if anyone was tracking her or planning to return. Every step had to be deliberate. Every choice carried weight. In the desert, mistakes could be fatal. Yet even as he contemplated the practicalities, another realization struck him. The woman's presence was changing something deeper. He had lived for years in solitude, attuned only to the rhythms of the land. Now, that solitary existence was disrupted by a life dependent on him. The moral responsibility pressed heavily on his shoulders, challenging his accustomed isolation and demanding empathy, courage, and vigilance. Suddenly, a subtle shift in the wind caught his attention. The grasses near a distant ridge rustled slightly, not with the natural breeze, but with something deliberate, almost measured. Tay's hand instinctively went to his bow. His eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. He could sense that the danger that had ensnared the woman might not be gone. Whoever had left her in the sack might still be watching, waiting for an opportunity to strike. He turned his gaze back to her, noting her fragile form and the steadying of her breaths. She was alive, yes, but vulnerable. And in this desert, vulnerability invited consequences. Tay understood that helping her now was not a choice. It was a necessity. Every instinct he had cultivated over years of survival, every skill honed in isolation, would be required to protect her as the sun climbed higher. Casting harsh shadows across the plains, Tay made a silent vow. He would keep her safe. He would uncover the truth behind her captivity. And he would face whatever dangers the desert and the mysterious forces surrounding her had in store. In that suspended moment, the Apache realized something profound. The desert had brought him a life he did not expect, and with it, a challenge far greater than mere survival. The consequences of lifting the sack were immediate, undeniable, and irreversible. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long, fiery shadows across the desert plains. The woman, now sitting more steadily on the bed of grasses Tay had arranged, had regained some of her strength. Her breaths, though still uneven, were steady enough for conversation, and her eyes, once wide with terror, now held a glimmer of trust. The weight of what had happened, the confinement, the suffocating sack, the strange revelation hung between them like the heat in the air, palpable but no longer paralyzing. Tay kept his gaze on the horizon, alert as ever, yet a subtle shift had occurred within him. The encounter had changed him. Years of solitude had taught him self-reliance, patience, and vigilance, but they had not prepared him for the moral complexity of saving a life that was both fragile and extraordinary. He realized that survival was no longer just about himself. It was now intertwined with hers, with the fragile thread of trust she had placed in his hands. The woman spoke softly, her voice steadying with each word. "Thank you for finding me. I thought I'd be left there forever." She paused, her eyes scanning the desolate horizon. "I don't even know why they did this, or who they are." Tay nodded, understanding her fear and confusion. "The desert holds many secrets," he said. "Sometimes danger hides where you least expect it. But right now, you're safe. We'll figure out what came before and what might still be out there." There was a silence, heavy but not uncomfortable, as they both absorbed the magnitude of the ordeal. The desert, relentless and indifferent, had tested them. And yet, in that testing, a bond had been forged, a connection born of urgency, trust, and mutual reliance. The woman had survived because of him, and he had confronted forces beyond ordinary survival to do so. He finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "You were left to die, but the desert and fate brought you here. There are lessons in every trial, and perhaps this is one we were both meant to face." The woman nodded, tears glimmering at the corners of her eyes, not from fear, but from relief and gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she said softly. I can't even imagine it." As the sky shifted from gold to deep indigo, the desert seemed to exhale, its harsh beauty softened by the evening light. Tay knew that the immediate danger might not yet be gone, that mysteries remained unsolved and threats possibly lingered. But he also understood something deeper. Life, even in its most precarious forms, demanded action, compassion, and courage. In the quiet that followed, Tay reflected on the chain of events, the desperate plea, the mysterious sack, the revelation that had stopped time itself. The desert had given him a new purpose, a responsibility he could not ignore. And for the first time in many years, the loneliness he had accepted as his lot seemed incomplete, replaced by the presence of another life to protect, guide, and witness the world alongside him. The woman rested, leaning slightly against him, and for a moment, the harsh wilderness felt almost gentle. The experience had left scars, yes, and questions that demanded answers. But it had also imparted understanding, that connection, trust, and courage could emerge even in the most isolated and unforgiving places. As night fell, the stars ignited the sky in brilliant clusters, and the desert seemed to hold them in suspended wonder. Tay knew that whatever came next, whether danger, discovery, or revelation, they would face it together. The events of the day had irrevocably changed both their lives. And while the desert remained as vast and unpredictable as ever, the solitary Apache and the rescued woman had forged a bond that could withstand its trials. A fragile yet undeniable thread linking them in shared survival and newfound understanding in the stillness of the night. Tay allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The desert had tested him, the desperate plea had called him, and the strange truth in the sack had forced him to see beyond his solitude. He had acted, protected, and survived not just for himself, but for another. And in doing so, he understood that life, no matter how harsh, carried meaning when one answered the call to save another.